So I also want to talk about data quality. We'll kind of end around data quality. So this is an area that we will cover in great detail in the webinar fifth webinar in our series, but I want to take this kind of time to just give an overview, a high-level overview of data quality. So let's just start with the intended use categories and hierarchy. So as we're moving from this bottom left with operational uses and we move bottom to top, we really start to increase the criticality of the data quality. So we're at the bottom, we're just dealing with operational issues like finances and workflows. Not to say data quality is not important, but not as important as we move into, say, the second, and third, and fourth layer, where we start to talk about individual patients. And these are, obviously very often, like I mentioned earlier, life and death types of decisions that are made for these individuals. And of course, the data quality is of the utmost importance in those circumstances. If we move and we start to aggregate individual patients into patient groups for, say, population health and quality management and reporting, we start to basically inherit the data quality from the previous uses. And then finally, at the top of that list or that hierarchy, we have scientific studies. And this is where we have, for example, even are building clinical practice guidelines, peer review, and then potentially even implementing. So again, there's that inheritance as we move from the lower tier to the top tier, and any data quality issues that are prevalent in the lower tier will certainly be inherited into the upper tiers. Another area that we'll go into much more detail, but I want to touch in here is that data quality frameworks. We mentioned about the use of standardized data quality frameworks. There should be a set of dimensions that are included in that framework and how they're defined and certainly how they're measured and instantiated into your organization. There's some kind of familiar favorites that we recognize with completeness, timeliness, and accuracy. But I want to give a special shout out to really my favorite, which is kind of a more modern data quality dimension, and that's auditability. I think it's really moving up in the ranks, partly because it really focuses, like I've mentioned earlier, on traceability. So what's the data provenance of the source, and what's the lineage as it moves through the various data systems before it gets to the final use case. Now, this is really useful when it comes to compliance audits, but it's also really useful because we're thinking and observing more data pipelines, so high velocity, high volume, high frequency data channels, and we need this kind of auditability dimension to really audit each of those individual channels and scale those audits across channels. Okay, and then another example of a data quality framework that's more explicit, not just kind of a template like I showed earlier, is PIQI. And this is the Patient Information Quality Improvement Framework, which is a healthcare specific open source data quality standard that's actually under ballot right now at HL7. This one consists of 4 dimensions. They include availability, accuracy, and conformity, and plausibility. These are you'll notice that timeliness is not there at this point, but this are really intended to evaluate and score data quality that is received from clinical data sources, so EHRs, but it can also address claims and encounters. But the objective is really to classify and score each data source against these 4 dimensions. And then you can, using those scores, start to kind of facilitate how do you improve the data quality and ultimately get it well suited, or best to say, fit for purpose on the usability of that particular data. And really one of the founding fathers, if not the founding father of PIQI, is Charlie Harp, is the CEO of clinical architecture, and he likes to say very succinctly, when you get to quality, you get to usability. So we'll start to touch on in the 5th webinar on how those start to complement each other, both usability and quality.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So Melissa was saying, data quality is a struggle, which I think we all can agree on. And then, qualifying it, like especially across different data types, EHRs, data aggregators, and flat files. And it would be interesting to expand upon the role of data quality with data aggregators, or is that really not part of their role? And does that, become part of the health plan's responsibility because the data aggregators really setting up the pipes, pulling it all in, putting it in one specific format, and then letting you to figure out kind of what to make of it. But what's your perspective
Yeah,
there?
what's my take on that? Well, I mean, I will reiterate it again. I mean, data quality, data management, it's everybody's responsibility. So even if you're talking within an organization or across organizations, and I think that's gets to be real clear about governance. Like, how do we share governance across organizations, and what do we expect of your organization internally when you having your own data management and governance? Let me use that actually as to kind of a step off point for what I'm showing here is, you know, part of the challenge with data quality and in enforcing and actually building it in a scalable way is that we have these varying definitions about, you know, what are the definitions of the attributes? What are the definition of the values that go into those attributes? And we need what I like to call like a lingua franca of data management within healthcare. And that for me is a role that FHIR really serves because it basically everything can distill to it's going to come from your own proprietary environments and the mappings as you mentioned, but if we can converge on this shared layer, and in fact I met with an analyst recently, we called it the audit layer, that FHIR was literally the audit layer. They can get data in CCDs and sending it out in a text file layout. I mean, things may not stay in FHIR, but they need to hit this point somewhere in their life cycle so that we can converge around it, so to say, semantically, and then define a consistent semantic interpretation across both of those environments or multiple environments, and then they can scale out from that. And that's part of the premise of PIQI as well, is that we need that standard framework, and then we can score against that standard framework. So I think a practical and a scalable approach to really improving data quality and the complexity that goes with it is somehow understanding where FHIR fits in your architecture, your technology stack, and then make sure you start to bubble out there from, say, a clinical data integration is ideal at that kind of core layer. But if it's happening, say, at the front end as it leaves your provider and it's just mapped to the API and it matches the API, the FHIR API, and then it comes in as FHIR, you have 2 points and make sure those align. And then you're then addressing what's happening pre and post of those translations to FHIR. Okay. Good question. I like questions about data quality, but I appreciate it's not necessarily easy. But this is the approach we're taking, is using FHIR as kind of that core, like I said, lingua franca of data quality.